Good evening. A warm welcome to everyone through the Brahma Kumari Center, Calgary. During this session, we will be communicating through the live chat. If you're unable to access the chat, please log into your Gmail account. If you're having any other difficulties or if you're not able to hear me, please let us know in the chat and one of us will be able to assist you. So our focus for the next few months is on self-care, improving qualities of everyday life. Since past month, we have discussed virtues that are very important in our lives. So this includes love, happiness, peace, balance, carefreeness, and acceptance. We have discussed how all these virtues bring a sense of clarity and provide us with the well-being in our lives. Last week, we discussed how important acceptance is in our lives. How important it is for us to accept other situations and how important it is for us to accept other individuals. And most importantly, we discussed how important it is for us to accept ourselves. Because this acceptance is what brings us contentment. It is what brings us peace and happiness. But there can be situations in our life, or crisis for that matter, when things are not going the way we want them to be. Or, we sometimes create these resolutions for ourselves for the things we want to change about ourselves. But then midway through, we realize that we're not meeting those standards for ourselves. So that moment is what gives us a sense of disbelief or disconnect. And we almost feel like giving up in that moment. But the truth is that life can be very difficult. There can be a lot of pressure to keep it all together. To be smart and beautiful. To be good and peaceful at all times. But, we don't have it all together at all times. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we don't feel or look our best. Sometimes things are challenging. However, the challenge in situations like these, or the real challenge in the moment of crisis, is to see crisis as an opportunity for you to grow to your highest being, even when it might seem impossible to do so. It is much easier to notice what we don't have than to accept what we do, or than to appreciate what we do. In moments like this, we always look at what we lack. And with this attitude, we're not able to solve that situation. We're not able to get through it. So the only way we can get through these situations is when we gather the courage to do so. When we gather the courage to have a positive outlook on life. And this positive outlook is what gives us the energy and power to get through that situation. So today's virtue of discussion is courage. So before we start, my question to everyone listening is, what does courage mean to you? Or what are some terms that come to your mind when I say the word courage? I'll give you all a few moments to think of your answer. Like, what does courage mean specifically to you? You can feel free to share your answers in the live chat. So, coming back, some of you might say that being courageous means being fearless, or some might say that it means being brave, or some even might say that being courageous means being confident. To some individuals, courage means having a clear picture of what you want and have no sense of any obstacles. So just having a good picture of what you want. And for some, courage might mean having the ability to face every situation. But this doesn't mean that we're facing it with aggression. So courage to me is a power, is like energy that we all have available, that whether we realize it or not, but we have it at all times when we need it, especially when we're facing crisis or when we're facing challenging situations, or most importantly, when we're facing our fears. So this brings me, I want to share a story with you guys. So there once was a man who was very much interested in self-knowledge and self-realization. Getting to that higher power or that highest form of being was the only purpose of his life. So he spent his whole life looking for a master who would teach him meditation. He went from one master to the other and then to the other, but nothing was happening. So he was so tired and exhausted of just looking for someone who would show him the right path, that one day someone came up to him and told him that if you really want to find a master, you will have to go to the Himalayas. He lives in some unknown part. You will have to search for him. One thing is certain though, he is there. Nobody knows where exactly, because every time someone comes to know of his location, he moves even deeper into the Himalayan ranges. The man was getting old now, but he still gathered his courage and worked for 2 years to get money for his journey. Remember now, the story is very old, so he had to ride on camels, he had to ride on horses and go on foot until he finally reached Himalayas. And upon getting there, he asked all the locals of where he could find his master. And again, he got the same answer. Everyone told him that yes, they have heard of the man. Very ancient he is. No one knows how old. Maybe 300 years, maybe 500 years. But one thing is certain, that he is there. But no one knows where exactly. But if he wants to search hard enough, he is bound to find him. So the man searched and searched for days, for weeks, for months. And it had been 2 years that he was roaming in Himalayas, tired and exhausted, living only on wild fruit, leaves, and grass. He had lost much weight, but he was intent that he had to find this man. Even if it even if it costs him his life, it would be worth it. And can you imagine? One day, he saw a small hut, a green hut, and he was so tired that he couldn't even walk, so he crawled. When he reached the hut, he saw that there was no door. And when he looked inside, there was no one inside either. And not only was there no one inside, but there was every sign indicating that there had been nobody inside for years. Now you can imagine what could have happened to this man. He fell on the ground out of sheer tiredness, fully exhausted, under the sun in the cold breeze of the Himalayas. His mind still wanted to keep going, but his body had given up at this point. But suddenly, he became aware that somebody was leaning over him. When he opened his eyes, that very ancient man was there. The old man, smiling, said, "What have you come to ask me?" Now the man lying on the ground had never felt this much of a blissfulness in his life. He had finally achieved what he had desired. He could now start his journey of self-realization. But in this story, if the man had no courage to begin with, if he had no motivation, then he would have never gotten what he desired. His motivation to learn more about self-realization is what gave him the courage to go look for his master. If he was fearful about the consequences, maybe he would have never started his journey. As they say, courage is the magic that turns dreams into reality. In our lives, we all have had instances where we felt the need to push ourselves or gather courage to get through a tough situation or to make a tough choice. In those instances, if we trust ourselves and know what we need is what is right for us, we somehow have the energy and the courage to get through it. As I mentioned earlier, courage is the energy we all have when we need it. We just need to be sure that what we want is what we desire, is what we really want. So there are two types of situations that require us to gather that courage. So we need courage to step out of our comfort zone, and we need courage to overcome our fears. So this brings me to the first topic of our discussion. What are some situations that require us to step outside of our comfort zone? Or have we ever faced a situation like that where we were required to step out of our comfort zone? So I'll give you all a moment to reflect on this. When have you in your life gathered all the courage to step out of your comfort zone? So, coming back, one of the things that require us to step out of our comfort zone is choosing between what is right and something that's easy. Because Sometimes choosing something right requires us to step outside of our comfort zone. So, for example, nowadays we're all surrounded by all kinds of technology. So, whether it be our phones or laptops, and we check our phones first thing when we wake up, and that's the last thing we check before we go back to sleep. And every spare minute that we have, we always go on our phones, isn't it? We always try to fill in those gaps throughout our day, just scrolling through our Facebook or Instagram. And in all this, we know that the time we put our phones on the side, our mind will wander off to places or things that might not be peaceful. It might go start thinking about all the negative conversations, everything that might not bring us happiness. But on the side, we also know how important it is for us to have that alone time, and how important it is for us to have time where we sit with ourselves. But despite all that, we still choose the easier option to go on our phones. But in situations like this, we need to have the courage to choose what is right for us. Because sitting by ourselves, having that alone time, is what will help us figure out or get through or solve any internal conflicts that we might have going on. And sitting by yourself not only helps us get a better control over our mind, but it also helps us realize or acknowledge our strengths and helps us refine them. It also helps us figure out our weaknesses and how we can work on them. Another example is, so when you come home from work and you don't necessarily feel like cooking, so your first instinct is just to order something from outside, despite of knowing that that food might not be the healthiest option. It might not be fresh, or it might not bring you the best health. But despite that, you choose the easier option over something that's right for you. So in both of these examples, we need to make sure that we have the discipline and the courage to choose what is right for us over something that's easier. Because something right is what gives us that good quality life. Now, the second thing that requires us to step outside of our comfort zone is being flexible and having the ability to accept that change. Now that we are in the midst of this pandemic and our lives and everything around us has changed to a point we could have never imagined it would. Some of us have seen the worst times. Some of us have lost our jobs. Some of us have even some individuals struggled to accept this change and had trouble getting their life back to where it was before the pandemic. However, those who took those steps of courage by accepting the change avoided straining their minds over something they never had control over. They didn't waste their time thinking about what they didn't have, but instead they took advantage of every opportunity that came their way. So, even most of my peers who graduated with me, they didn't necessarily find jobs in their field of study. But despite that, they accepted any job that came their way, whether it was within their field of interest or not. But because they had the courage to accept the change, it made it easier for them to cope with the circumstances. This reminds me of a story that I want to share with everyone. So, an eagle has the longest lifespan of all its species. It can live up to 70 years. But to reach this age, it needs to make one of the most difficult decisions of its life. So, around 40th year, eagles' long and flexible talons can no longer grab prey, which serves as their food. Their long and sharp beaks, they become bent. And their old-aged, heavy, thick feathers begin to stick to their chest, making it harder for them to fly. Now, in this situation, eagle is left with two choices. One of them is to die, or second one is to have the courage to accept the situation and go through the painful process of change. And this process lasts them about 150 days, so around 5 months. The process requires an eagle to fly to the top of the mountain and sit in its nest, and the eagle knocks on its beak until it plucks it out. Then the eagle will wait for the new beak to grow, after which it starts to pluck on its talons. And when they grow back, the eagle starts to pluck on its old-aged feathers. And after this, the eagle takes the most famous flight of rebirth and lives for 30 more years. So why was acceptance needed? Why was it so important for the eagle to accept the change? It was to survive and to live. Just like the eagle, we should not be afraid of the change and should have the courage to accept it gracefully. And now moving on to the third thing that requires one individual to step outside of their comfort zone. That is our ability to choose what we desire despite of the consequences. So nowadays, only a small number of individuals work the jobs that they really enjoy or something that they're really passionate about. Most of them are inclined to settle for jobs that might bring them money to pay their rent or that might help them feed their families, but it's not necessarily that matches their area of interest. This is because we never take the courage to look for something that we might really enjoy. This could be due to family constraints, that some individuals are required to work just because they have to provide for their families. It could be because they don't know how to get there. Or it could be because they're too afraid to try something that's outside the norm. For example, a lot of students who want to pursue medicine might think it's a long way to go before they reach the destination, or might think it's too hard to get into the program. So they might settle for something easy in the process, or they might even choose a different career in the process. And by overthinking that, they create barriers that might not even exist. However, if only they took that one step of courage towards the right destination, is when they will be able to transform their life into something amazing, something that they really enjoy, something that they're passionate about. As they say, you get in life what you have the courage to ask for. So all these situations that we just discussed require us to take those steps of courage that in turn help us step out of our comfort zone. Doing so helps us accept every challenge and appreciate every opportunity that comes our way. Just like the man in the story. If he had never taken those steps of courage to look for something that he really wanted, he would have never reached his destination. If he started to think of possible consequences of the barriers and some of his fears about what could go wrong, he would have never gathered the courage to start his journey. So this brings me to our second topic of discussion, which is what are some of our fears that stop us from growing in our lives? I want you all to take a moment to reflect on some of the fears that you have that stop you from growing, that stop you from exploring, that stop you from living your life fully. Coming back. So some of you might be fearful of moving to a new place. Some of you might be fearful of living by yourself. Some of you might be fearful of driving a car, or some might be fearful of heights. And some individuals are even fearful of having a bad health condition. So basically, fear is something that you're not familiar with, something that you're not comfortable with. These fears come in form of threats that something might go wrong, you might have an accident, or you might not do the best, or so they keep on always putting us down. Now there are two ways people deal with these fears in their lives. One is that they're able to face their fear, they're able to find the courage to stop those fearful thoughts. And there is a second way that people deal with these fears. That is, some of them become a victim to their fears and imagine the worst that can happen. It is impossible for them to think clearly when they're flooded with all the anxiety of their fears. Therefore, they give up before they even start, before they even are faced with that situation. For example, when you were younger and when you went to an amusement park and you're excited, but at the same time you're also fearful of those big rides. If you took that courage, you have fun. But if you were fearful and let yourself sit back, you forget to have that fun. So you let that fear take over your life. So if you think that you have fallen victim to your fears, it is important for us to understand that avoiding fears only makes them scarier. It is important for us to get that energy of courage to help us push through that situation. For example, I'm sure most of us in our childhood have have been home alone, or have the time when, the lights went out, and all of a sudden you hear some noise. So, and the minute you hear the noise is when your mind starts to create these fears within you. You try to think that it might be an intruder or something else. So you sit back under your blanket for a while. But majority of us have gathered that courage to get up and find what the source of that noise was. Only if you had gotten up is when you realized that it was nothing to worry about, and when you were finally able to sit at peace after that. So now in this situation, if you had let your fear stop you from checking for where that source of noise was, you would have spent every moment from there on in the fear. You would have constantly worried about what it could be. But having that courage to overcome that fear helped you enjoy every moment after that. So similarly, we need to stop letting our fears control our lives. If the guy in the story that we talked about earlier was fearful about the consequences, not being able to find his master, or even getting lost, or not being able to find his way, he might not have ever started his journey. However, he took those steps of courage to begin his journey and he overcame those fears by focusing just on the destination and trusting what he was doing was what was right and is what he desired. So what are some steps that we can take to gather that courage? Whenever you're faced with a challenge, you need to take that courage. But before that, take a moment of silence and invoke that courage. With the patience, you will know what to do and when. Courage doesn't mean that you're not afraid, but it means that you're willing to challenge your fears for what you know is right to do, or to say, or to be. But one lesson worth remembering is that you cannot overcome your fears by avoiding them. It only grows. Fear can only be overcome by moving through it. So here are some suggestions that can help us cross that barrier of fear. First one is acknowledging our fear, taking time to understand it, and sometimes even naming our fear. Because many times we don't realize, but fear sits in us as an emotion, and we're not really clear of what we're even fearful of. So naming our fear makes it more tangible to deal with. Second way that we can cross that barrier of fear is to reflect on some practical steps that you can take immediately. Doing something practical helps us build that confidence. Often by overthinking about the fear makes us feel overwhelmed. Doing something practical helps us get a better control of the situation. So when I was learning how to drive, I would create all these fears about what it would be when I would start driving alone. I would make all these scenarios of what could possibly go wrong, and which is why I took every step back. I tried to avoid driving by myself every time and tried to make excuses. But until one day when I took that step of courage and decided to just go on a drive by myself. And that one step is all it took for me to get over that fear. So doing something practically really helped me gain that confidence and helped me get over that fear that I had created in my head. Third thing that we can do to overcome these barriers that we have created is to reconnect with our inner self, either through meditation or even writing about it if we can't focus. Allowing yourself to reassure that positive energy of love. Often just taking time to reconnect with yourself will help you see the situation in a different light. But if you're not able to do that, it's always better to talk to someone else that you have a good relationship with, or someone who you trust. It helps you see your way around that situation. So when when I was younger, I would always talk to my parents if I was fearful about any upcoming exam, if I was stressed, if I was worried. I would tell them that, I don't feel confident, or I don't feel prepared, or that I don't know if it's going to be what I expect it to be. And their only reply was, as long as you have worked hard, you don't have to worry about the consequences. So this tells us that talking to someone, that even the one sentence they said provides you with so much courage that other things don't matter. After that, walking into the exam fearlessly, I would do so much better than I would have ever expected. So I just want to readdress what we discussed. Courage is something that we all have, but it only comes when we are mindful of what we're working towards is what we want. When we have a clear picture of our destination, it gives us the motivation to change that into reality. And that motivation, in turn, gives us the courage to get to that destination. So courage helps us get higher and forward in life. It helps us explore the newness in life. We should all remember, though, that when we take those steps of courage, we will get all the support that we need. The life is bound to help us back. I'm sure many of us have even experienced this. For example, when my parents were moving to Canada, they were fearful they were kind of putting second thoughts into it because they didn't want to leave their family behind. They didn't want to leave their jobs behind or their friends. So for them, this was a huge step. But after contemplating over it for a while, they finally took the courage to move. And that one step is all it took, because when we got here, they got all the support, all the help that they needed. So just that one step is all it took. Even when you think of a kid, when they learn to walk, for the first time, a kid holds on to the bed railing and pushes themselves up. And when a parent sees that, they help them take all the other steps after that. They put in every effort to make it easier for the kid after. So as they say, in life, nobody and nothing will help you until you start helping yourself. So all it takes is that one step of courage for everything else to start falling into place. I want to end off this presentation with a small commentary. So please close your eyes. Take just a minute. I sit quietly and still. I begin to see how the habit of getting stuck in negativity has derailed my mind into fear and anger. Now, in this moment of quiet concentration, I decide to transform every negativity into a positive opportunity to create betterment. In the quietness of mind, I feel free, light, courageous, and I become confident. Now I step out into my day, observing and interacting with new clarity and positivity. Thank you. Please feel free to ask any questions if you have any, but I hope you all have a great day ahead. Thank you so much for joining this presentation today. We'll just take a few minutes to sit quietly now.